The long, tropical grass of the island is blown back at considerable force as the helicopter lowers. It's a hawk, the last that we've been waiting on. I raise a hand and shield my eyes as the aircraft settles itself down on the ground. The air here is thick and warm, and the wind blown about by the rotary blades is cooling and very welcome against my skin. I am a soldier here, and I am one of only a few dozen. One of the first members of the new batch of Americans dropped down here onto Philippine soil.
"Attention!"
calls my superior, and my body tenses in automatic response, my shielding hand transformed into a quick salute. My eyes flicker over to a palm tree down towards the coast, its enormous leaves swaying and blowing. The Philippine government has, for a variety of reasons, granted the United States access to 4 of its key military bases. I stand on the grounds of one of them, an airbase on the island of Palawan. With access at last granted to these sites, the US has successfully stitched the gap around the South China Sea, and an effective perimeter can be established. The Chinese, of course, are furious, and there are many here in the Philippines who despise us and already want us gone. Geopolitically, the up-and-coming American presence on this island will aid my government's strategy in curtailing potential Chinese military growth. That's the official line. But that is not the real reason we are here. Not my task force, at least. Our goals are somewhat more misaligned from the prevailing narrative. The Hawk helicopter before me settles on the grass, and the blades slow to a gradual stop. The cooling effect is lost, and almost instantly, a mosquito buzzes past my eye. I blink it away as the doors to the copter are hauled open, and the last batch of soldiers file out and onto the airfield. I know some of them. There's Miller and Barnes. Good guys. Guys I've worked with in previous capacity. Though Miller can be a little annoying in an endearing sort of way. Another man I recognize steps out. He lands on the grass with a dull thud, and his eyes meet mine. I grimace with frustration and watch as he joins the ranks. Copper, an unbelievably ugly bastard, no wit or charm about him at all. And yet, despite the odds, he somehow still managed to fuck my girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend now, of course. Perhaps he did me a favor. She was one of those types, in hindsight, jumping from uniform to uniform, and I'm not the first guy to get jodied. Still, it stings, and I'm not exactly going to shake the bastard's hand. I watch him with a cold glare for a moment more, then flicker my attention over to my commanding officer. He stands beside a broad-shouldered higher-up from the Philippine Army. A glance to his insignia designates him as a lieutenant. I'm yet to see anyone of a higher rank on the base.
"Those of you set for airbase orientation, you're dismissed,"
barks the CO. He casts a cool blue eye over the lot of us.
"Fall out. The rest of you, you know who you are."
About 2/3 of the surrounding soldiers break ranks and begin their jog to the nearest set of squat low buildings. I remain behind along with Barnes, Miller, and Copper, as well as a host of others. The CO waits until the others have departed. Then he lifts his chin and continues his little speech.
"Task Force Z, allow me to introduce you to Lieutenant Abalos of the Scout Rangers. From this moment forth, command of your unit will be transferred to this man, and he will remain as such until he relinquishes you back to me upon the completion of your mission."
A Scout Ranger, one of the Musangs. I've heard stories about these guys. I turn my attention to the lieutenant. You can tell by simply looking at him that he's seen some shit. A vein twitches in Lieutenant Abalos' neck.
"You are here as part of the deal arranged between our governments,"
he says in a loud, clear voice.
"Your expertise in fighting entities beyond our traditional understanding is why you were invited here. It's why my government has granted you Kanos, a return to my country, and it will allow you to fortify your ring around the South China Sea.
He makes eye contact with me.
But make no mistake, my care for grand diplomacy and politics has long since been worn out of me. There is little that interests me but the safety and security of my people. If I deem this task force to be any kind of hindrance, or if I detect amongst you incompetence, you will all be immediately cast out and your national presence on this island will end. You will then have the luxury of explaining to your superiors why you cost them my air base. Is that understood?
Sir, yes, sir,
comes the unified reply, and the lieutenant turns away. He mutters something to my CO, my former CO I suppose. Then he points behind us, and we hear the sound of a series of engines sparking into life.
Transport is ready and waiting, he grunts. Head to the trucks. Fall out.
I break my salute and turn with the rest. We jog to the transport trucks, all painted in deep olive green, engines rumbling and ready to go. I haul myself up and into the back of the closest truck and reach out a hand to help up my comrades. Miller is right behind me, short, close-cropped blonde hair, bright blue eyes, full of naivety. He's new to the task force, a green boy, but a good man. His heart's in the right place. I clap him on the shoulder as I pull him up, and we move further down the truck to allow the others to enter. He sits on the bench opposite me.
We're here, Sawyer,
he says to me with a glint in his eye.
We're actually here, both of us, in Task Force Z. I didn't even think it was real at first, but I'm actually in. I'm gonna take part in a real mission.
Quiet down, man, I say with a wave of my hand as the truck fills up.
Start acting like a soldier. You're not a kid. This is serious shit.
Yeah, but Sawyer, he continues, lowering his voice and leaning close as the doors to the truck slam shut. The vehicle continues to rumble as it makes its way along the dirt track towards the jungle. Task Force Z. I've heard stories. I heard that about a year ago, you guys were defending, what was it? Some kind of angel-like figure, right? Protecting it from something? I rub my jaw and stare off into space for a moment, mind rich with sudden flashes of memory. To call the being we protected an angel-like figure does it an enormous, monstrous, false service. But Miller is close enough to the truth, I guess. I nod. But you shouldn't expect anything like this time, Miller, I tell him gravely. This isn't an escort mission, from my understanding. The things that lurk in this corner of the world, they're different. I suppress a wave of fear. I push it back down and do my best not to dwell on it. Miller scratches his chin in thought and looks away, and we sit in silence for a while as the truck makes its way through the winding paths of the jungle. His mind is racing though. I can almost hear it.
Oof, Jesus,
someone mutters a little further down as the truck strikes a hole in the road, and we all judder and rock uncomfortably. The bump is the first of many, and it's a long while before we at last come to a halt. We hear a loud knock on the side of the truck.
All right, everybody out,
comes a deep voice. And as the doors are thrown wide open, the greenish jungle light spills inside. I exchange a look with Miller and disembark. And before long, we're marching in pairs through dense, vine-covered rainforest.
Make sure your fatigues are tucked into your boots,
echoes a voice down through the ranks.
This area is rife with scorpions and spiders. You get one of those fuckers in your camos, and you'll be in for a rough goddamn night.
There are grunts and murmurs as some of my compatriots reach down to obey, and I swat away mosquitoes as Miller keeps pace beside me.
So where are we going?
He asks eagerly. I don't know exactly where, I reply, but we'll be operating from a camp, I think. I'm so excited, man. I'm going to see it all for myself. The spirit world, the truth. I always knew there was more to life than what we can see. Who knows how many?
Miller,
I shoot him a sharp glance. Just cool it a little. Spirit world? Truth? You're acting like you're about to get some grand reveal. It's just It's not like that. He cocks his head. What do you mean? I sigh. It's tough to explain. You'll see what I mean. But don't go expecting any kind of truth. Once you've seen some of the stuff that lurks between the gaps, well, it only raises more questions. Don't go looking for any kind of truth where there is none. I've never known you to be so cryptic, Sawyer. Miller chuckles. I scowl in response, turning away to face the dark jungle ahead of me. I'm not trying to be cryptic. I just don't know how to express myself. We aren't entering into a world of fairies here. And once the scale of the secrets in the shadows becomes clear to you, well, it makes it just that little bit harder to sleep is all. It's hard to stay hopeful. I'm trying to temper Miller's expectations without prematurely crushing that hope entirely. Because once it's gone, it's gone. We march for another 2 hours and cover a few more miles of dense jungle terrain. The distant hollers and hoots of monkeys and the shrill cries of birds are gradually lost to a rising crescendo of rainfall. A melody that starts light and gentle, but quickly becomes a discordant downpour all around. The leaves and earth beneath our boots are rapidly washed and melted into a thick, sticky mud, and the going becomes more difficult. When at last we reach the campsite, the troop is exhausted, and wearily we stand in formation in the rain. Miller wavers to my right, and I reach out a hand and grab him by the scruff of his uniform, rebalancing him and keeping him in place. To my left is a guy with a shaved head, a little taller than myself, a former comrade, Barnes. We've operated together under the umbrella of Task Force Z on 2 occasions so far. This is said to be the 3rd. Good to see you again, buddy, I whispered to him from the corner of my mouth as Lieutenant Abelos began striding up and down the ranks of soldiers. You too, man, he says in his characteristically low voice. You ready for this shit? Nope, I reply as Abelos approaches. He comes to a stop, his hands clasped behind his back, the rain dripping from the front of his cap. Behind them and jutting out from the jungle foliage is a raised hill fort, ringed with a fence made of wooden poles sharpened into spikes. Half-buried walls of concrete and metal jut out at odd angles from the mud and leaf-strewn hill before us, and a series of colored floodlights point out in a variety of directions. The white lights are focused in on the outpost itself, and the ones pointing out into the jungle are a softer, warmer orange. A lone red beam has been angled up towards the night sky through a gap in the canopy. The illuminated ring looks like blood in its glare.
You have been called here to aid my own forces in defense of this island,
shouts the lieutenant over the downpour.
You will be split into smaller battle groups, and each will be a mix of Philippine and United States armed personnel.
He scans his eyes down the whole line.
Tremors, seismic activity, and the increased rate of activation of our various spiritual apparatus.
What's he talking about? Miller whispers to me, but I shush him as the lieutenant's eyes snap over to us.
All suggest a likelihood of attack in the next couple of days, hence why you were rushed here so swiftly. The first attack may even be tonight. Then we will know what we're truly dealing with here.
He looks away, further down the line, and raises his voice.
A shaman will accompany you through the jungle. She is the only shaman available, and her safety is the priority. Protection of the shaman is your highest order, and her defense supersedes protection of this base.
A chill passes through me.
Without her, we are lost. Protect the shaman.
He takes a step forward at us and brings his speech to a close.
Americans,
he says simply,
Kanos,
do not assume that there is little stake here for you in this jungle. The spiritual awakening facing my country is indicative of a wider global situation. Failures here will have repercussions and ramifications that you cannot yet comprehend. The terrors of the night are waking up. Stem the tide.
Dismissed.
Then, with a wave of his hand, our salutes raise in unison. and we fall out, allowing ourselves to be sorted into our smaller battle groups.
Miller,
shouts an officer, pointing off to his right.
Barnes, you two Sawyer, go!
I join the team as it steadily grows. "Kamusta, Americans?" a Philippine soldier says to me. Stepping forward with a wide grin, he reaches out a hand and clams my own, shaking it. He puts it to his chest and introduces himself. "Alejandro, pleasure to meet you," he says. As one of the battle groups heads out into the jungle with the blow of a whistle, I introduce myself and Miller and Barnes in turn.
"Battle Group C,"
an officer shouts in our direction, grimacing as I see the big ugly head of Copper approaching us.
"One more for you,"
the officer says.
"Form up and head out. Follow on behind Battle Group B."
Fuck's sake, I mutter as Copper joins our ranks.
"What the hell are you doing here, Copper? You need to pass a minimum IQ test to be part of Task Force Z."
He smiles humorlessly at me.
"Get over it already, Sawyer. I'm sorry your girl was a total slut, alright?"
I step forwards and shove him, and he skids in the mud as he tries to maintain his balance.
"Hey!"
barks the officer.
"Cut that shit out. Didn't you hear me? Follow on behind Battle Group B. Go!"
We set off through the thickest of the jungle. I clench my jaw and fume as we march between the twisted trunks and tangled vines.
"Look, just focus on the objective, alright, Sawyer?"
Barnes says to me, clamping a heavy hand down onto my shoulder.
"Right,"
I mutter. "Sure." Our battle group meets up with A and B in a small clearing, and the lieutenant himself comes up alongside us. He gestures to a white, flat rock jutting out from a cluster of ferns, and upon it sits a young girl. I doubt she could be any older than 12 or 13. I pause, confused. "What the?" Miller begins. "What's a girl like that doing all the way out here, all alone?" She's dressed in white and shrouded in interwoven orchids. She holds in her hand a flickering lantern. Shadows dance across her face, and she appears to be whispering to herself.
"This is the shaman,"
Lieutenant Abelow says to us.
"Once she has finished blessing this land, you will accompany her into the forest."
He outlines the positions and formations each battle group should take, explaining that groups D to F will remain in position around the base for tonight.
"You have maps, compasses, GPS equipment in the event that you are lost or separated. But I can assure you that the shaman knows these jungles far better than any of you ever will. She won't get lost. Trust her path and defend her with your lives."
He brings up his hand, and with another salute, we get ourselves into position. And then, for a while, we simply wait. This bizarre white-clad girl in the forest keeps whispering as the rain falls all around. Miller nudges me, and I glance at him. "So, are we allowed to talk to her? She's so young. Is she really the only one they could find to do this sort of thing?" Alejandro to my right looks over. He lowers his gun from its position, fixed on the dark jungle bushes ahead. "She's all we have, yes," he says. "Have you been stationed at this base before?" Miller asks. Alejandro nods and flashes another white grin. "She is a child of the forest. Not the last, but the only one with any connection to the spirit world. We aren't sure how she acquired this connection exactly. Or, if my superiors do know, it's not information they're keen to share with grunts like us." "What makes her so special?" Alejandro scratches his jaw. She holds back the tide. Look, she's starting to move." We watch as the girl begins to clamber down from the rock, stepping into the wet mud at its base and beginning to make her way towards the edge of the clearing. The battle groups all around her, half hidden in the deep green shadows, coordinate their movements and flow like rising waters as they keep pace. "Let's go," Alejandro whispers as we tread carefully, weaving our way past branches and between the dense leaves. The shaman, a pale flickering flame of white and orange amidst the gloom. "So we guard the shaman with our lives?" Miller asks. Just like that. Can she really be that important? Alejandro shoots him a glance. He smiles, but with no teeth this time. Miller, right? Right. Even if you don't believe in the power that this shaman possesses, just take a look at her. She's a young girl, an innocent, a civilian. Is it not your role to protect these people? Your entire purpose as a soldier? Alejandro is completely right, of course. And Miller knows it. Embarrassed, he says nothing further, and we continue to creep through the forest. After a few more minutes, Alejandro raises a hand, and Miller, Barnes, and I come to a stop just behind him. I adjust my position a little, and watch as, through the trees, the shaman steps over a fallen log, sits down upon it, and starts to whisper. Alright, spread out a little and stay on your guard, Alejandro says. Keep sights on the shaman at all times, but don't ignore what's in front of you. I head out a little with Miller just beside me. We're close, aren't we? He says to me, excitement in his voice as we approach the edge of a small pond, its surface assaulted by the rain. Close to what? To the spirits. I can feel them, can't you? It's like a crackling of electricity. I can feel it across my skin. Are you sure it isn't just rain? Did you not feel anything when you fought for that angel? I suppress a deep sigh. Miller, you need to understand. The thing we defended, it wasn't quite an angel. Not of any kind that we're familiar with, at least. Hey, Sawyer? Miller says, his expression faltering a little. What's happening down there? He points to the pond, and following his line of sight, we watch as the water level in the pond begins to drop. It's subtle at first, but despite the rain and the rivers of water pooling and flooding all around us, in this particular pond, the water is being drained away. Leaves rustle in the darkness. We're both crouching, and Miller shuffles a little closer. I shoot a glance over to the shaman, still quiet in place on the fallen log. I turn back to the pond. The hell? I mutter. Where's all the water going? What's up? Comes the voice of Alejandro, and he joins us. There's something in there, Miller murmurs, leaning forwards, squinting down as the water in the pond recedes and vanishes. What the hell is that? I reach out to grab him and pull him back, but he bats me away. Don't be an idiot, Miller. It could be a crocodile or something. Those things can jump right out of the water, you know, and tear you apart. No, that's unlikely, Alejandro mutters, confused as the pond grows smaller and smaller. Branches stuck in the bottom begin to break the surface, revealed as the water level drops. There shouldn't be any crocodiles on Palawan. They live further east. He glances around and notices another small pond over to our left, beginning to drain away too, vanishing seemingly into the earth despite the bubbling streams that surround it. He pales suddenly and sucks some air in through his teeth. His eyes go wide with realization.
Get back!
He mutters, hissing.
Miller!
Miller leans closer, his hands in the mud. Something massive shifts beneath the surface of the now shallow water remaining in the pond.
Miller!
I shout, lurching forwards to grab him. But I am too late. The noise disturbs the shaman, and she stops whispering to look over at us as her lantern flickers. And from the draining pond before us bursts a sudden terror. A shadow come to life, lizard-like and wrapped in a camouflage comprised of the forest itself. Vines, ferns, with skin like rotted wood. Its eyes are two golden embers in deep black pits. Two enormous, branch-like antlers grow out from either side of its head. It is a monster. I have never seen anything like it. It all happened so quickly. Panic erupts over to our left as bursts of light begin flashing in the jungle. And even with the suppressors, the rifles are loud and cut like blades through the splashing of the rain.
Protect the target!
rings the voice of an officer, and the shaman is immediately ringed by a circle of soldiers. We were discouraged from doing this, as it not only disrupts the shaman's rituals, but draws to her unnecessary attention. That being said, however, her protection, as was made quite clear, is priority number one. The beast from the swamp lunges towards us and grabs a hold of Miller around his shoulders and chest in a pair of monstrous crocodilian jaws. A long, deep gurgling hiss rumbles out from its throat as it drags the thrashing soldier to the basin of the drained pond. And I watch dumbfounded as its huge, full belly begins to expel great quantities of water. The pond's water, I realize, blasting it like a torrent across Miller as it splashes like waves up against the pond's bare banks, refilling it at a rate I wouldn't think was possible. My eyes go wide, but my brow furrows, and I bring up the rifle, and with a cacophony of rattling and fire-like flashes, I empty the magazine into the creature's side, riddling the thing with bullet holes. A dark, viscous liquid, as well as streams of pond water, pour from these holes as it grapples with Miller, splashing the murky swamp water all up the banks and over our boots and camos.
Miller!
I shout in alarm as the creature attempts to drag him beneath the surface. I turn to my comrades.
Barnes, get him out of there. Can you reach?
Barnes hops down so that his feet are submerged. I do likewise on the creature's opposite side, wrestling with this monstrosity as it becomes harder and harder to stand. Barnes fires a few more bullets point blank into the creature's side, and it shoves up against him, slamming him into a large rock half jutting from the earth. The water levels continue to rise. The pond has now burst its banks, and the level of water within is far higher than it was before, and it still rises. I am no longer standing, but am in fact swimming alongside this writhing beast. A nearby stream gushes and froths and connects to the pond, and in seconds, the terrain is completely changed, different entirely to how it was mere moments ago. I flip around my weapon and slam the butt against the monster, but it's near impossible to tell which part I am striking. Miller has vanished from sight now. The creature dips below the water. I choke and cough and splutter, and I feel a set of arms grab me around the middle and haul me out. And as I blink away the murky pond water, heart pounding, I see Alejandro beside me doing the same for Barnes, who appears to have suffered some kind of injury.
Miller!
I shout with desperation to the churning waters beneath me. I attempt to shove away the arms of the soldier who hauled me out, and we both slip and collapse into the mud. I turn to face him, and to my disgust, I see that it is Copper.
Get your hands off me, you fucking imbecile!
I shout into his face, pushing him off of me and swiveling back around to face the pond. Though, the pond is now entirely lost, consumed by a larger, flowing river.
Miller! Miller! Where are you? He's gone, man.
Copper shouts, grabbing me and hauling me back.
And there's a fucking monster in there. You want to get killed as well? Miller!
I shout with anguish as the rest of the team is dragged back to the forest. 1 second, he was there. And then he was just gone.
Regroup around the target. All units,
comes the order. And I do so. Miller's disappearance, death, is instantly compartmentalized. Barnes is hauled away by a pair of medics, and I find myself as part of the defensive ring, with Alejandro to one side of me and Copper to my other. My heart pounds, and adrenaline surges.
Should we withdraw, sir?
One of my comrades calls to the officer, and he looks to his Philippine guide, another soldier, who mutters something into the officer's ear and gestures to the shaman.
Negative,
the officer replies over the rain.
We protect the shaman.
The shaman, seemingly lost in her own little world, rubs her eyes with her free hand, and she holds the lantern in the other. She turns and begins to calmly walk towards the trees, and the soldiers stare up at the officer in confusion.
Allow her to pass, he commands. Spread out a little, but hold a defensive circle. Do not forget your priority objective, gentlemen.
My heart hammers, but with an ice-cold precision and focus, I do as ordered. And our circle loosens, and we give the shaman some distance, allowing her to begin clambering through the forest. We do likewise, on high alert when we pass by bodies of water. There are creatures in the dark. There are monsters in the water. The shaman is like a fairy herself. Once she finds her stride, her movements become more natural. She flitters from place to place, weaving with grace between the curved trunks of the trees. All around her in the dark, we soldiers push through the undergrowth, arranging ourselves in formations and angling weaponry down to the bodies of water that surround us. I dread to think what lurks beneath. The spirits in this part of the world have clearly taken the form of something angry, something hungry. But whatever they are, they have awoken. I bring the rifle up to my shoulder, gritting my teeth as my comrades and I creep past a slim river. The surface, a rippling moving membrane as it is barraged by the endless rain. Discerning the exact time becomes difficult, but my guess is that around 10 or so minutes more pass before the shaman settles herself in the nook of an ancient tree, one that has split into two separate directions. She places a hand on the bark of the trunk and begins to whisper, her lantern flickering. A command is passed via hand signals around the ring of soldiers. Spread out, they say, presumably to give the girl some breathing room for whatever ritual has been deemed of importance. And hold positions. We do so. Copper puts a hand on my shoulder as he passes.
You okay, man?
Get your fucking hands off me, I snarl. What gives you the right to speak to me? I'll work with you if I'm ordered to do so, but I want nothing to do with you. You're scum. Anger flickers across his face, but he says nothing, only pours his eyes into mine. Then he sighs and looks away. I'm sorry about Miller. I liked him.
I don't care what you liked. Fuck off.
He chews his tongue, then turns without another word. He treads carefully, then crouches in position a few feet further away, his rifle aimed out towards the darkness that surrounds us.
I'm sorry, Miller.
I mutter quietly into the night. I visualize his face, his wide-eyed expression, and his excitement to see the spirits. I swallow and grip the rifle a little tighter.
I'm sorry.
The shaman remains in place for a further agonizing hour, until at last she decides she's had enough. She collects her lantern and turns to head back through the forest, back the way we came. There are no further incidents with the creatures from the depths. The officer in charge orders a contingent to separate off and hunt for signs of Miller as we pass by our former locations in the area at which we lost them. But it's impossible now to even get close to our previous positions. The waters have swollen and submerged the surrounding banks, trees, roots, and flora. The rock that Barnes hit his head on has vanished beneath the frothing surface. The area is almost entirely unrecognizable. And so, we return to the base, sullen and cold-hearted, and a good man down. I make eye contact with one of the soldiers from Battle Group D, tasked with defense of the base. He watches me uneasily as I pass him by.
Jesus, Sawyer, what the hell happened out there?
I say nothing. I simply collapse in my crappy little bunk in the barracks, with a night of twisted dreams to keep me company. The next day is rough. The rain lets up, but the air has become sickly and hot, sticky almost, and every second is spent in discomfort. Sweat trickles down my back in the crowded briefing room. It's full to the brim with soldiers. Those without a seat are pressed in, shoulder to shoulder, grumbling and shouting as the sounds of the jungle echo through the leaves beyond the window. At last, Lieutenant Abelos enters from the left with a pair of American officers. The rabble dies down, and Abelos waits until perfect silence before he speaks. He begins by mentioning Barnes and the other 2 soldiers who were injured in last night's attack.
Barnes,
He says,
Ruiz and Borja are all stable. No significant long-term injuries reported.
I am sorry to say, however, that recovered evidence from the scene of last night's attack indicates that Miller has been killed in action. I clench my fist. The group stirs, and Abelos puts out a hand to stem the volume from rising any further.
Thanks to their service and sacrifice, however, we now have a better idea of what exactly we are dealing with.
He says, "Allow me to explain." He nods to a man operating a projector, and the lights are dimmed. The projector whirs and hums, and its images are cast onto the great white wall at the front of the room. A sketch of a creature appears, one not dissimilar to the one I saw in brief glimpses last night. The black lines of the sketch are stark against the white-gray wall.
This,
Abelos begins,
is the buroka.
There is a murmuring among some of the Philippine soldiers in the room, but the phrase means nothing to myself.
These creatures are tied inherently to the forest and are of the kind that is linked inexorably with the natural world.
He says,
a creature of shadow that, once killed, melts effortlessly back into the landscape of which it is comprised. Now, see here.
He points to the belly of the reptilian beast, and the slide changes to the next. On this light is an almost identical sketch, except in this one, the buroka has pulled back onto its hind legs, and its belly is far larger.
The creature possesses the ability to inhale great quantities of water, far more than should be physically possible, and it is stored here, in the stomach. When shooting this creature, do not go for the head. Aim here instead, as to puncture the buroka's stomach causes it great distress and disrupts its ability to hold and weaponize water.
"Sir," comes the voice of one of the soldiers.
"What do you mean by weaponize?"
"The records we have on these creatures suggest that the buroka is an active hunter of large game, humans included," Abelos says. "It will drink the water from a lake or pond, encouraging its prey down into the freshly drained basin. It will then pounce, expelling the contents of its stomach and refilling the body of water in an attempt to disorient and drown its target, latching onto them and holding them under the water in the manner of a crocodile." I suppress a wave of nausea as I imagine what Miller's final moments must have been like. I grimace and push these thoughts aside. "So the shaman?" Someone else calls out from the opposite side of the room.
"These rituals that she does, she keeps these things back?"
"Our understanding on the matters of the rituals are limited at best," Abelos continues. "But the gathered evidence suggests that they are useful in stemming spiritual activity in the area." He pauses. "Your battle groups will be equipped with appropriate additional weaponry to help you fight against these creatures. Clean and then organize the outpost equipment, then take the rest of the day to relax. Battle Group D, E, and F will be going out into the forest with the shaman tonight, and I will accompany you. Groups A, B, and C, you'll defend the outpost. Fallout." And so we do. With worry and sadness in my chest, I put my energy into my work on the base. Then, I rest up in my bunk, staring at the ceiling as the insects chirp beyond the window. I used to be like Miller. I used to think like him. But, in my experience, the spirits are not something to fawn over. They might have been, once, but they aren't anymore. They are dangerous and hostile. When the night falls on the second night, our teams are left behind to guard the outpost. We watch the shaman disappear into the darkness, flanked on all sides by the soldiers in their camos. Many of the floodlights that point into the base are switched off, and we take up our positions and guard the outer perimeters. Creatures holler and call to one another in the darkness. The night stretches on. Fireflies flit between the bushes. But there is no rain tonight. Just the sounds of the jungle in all their mystery. To my great displeasure, Copper is once again stationed far too close for comfort. "Watch the bushes over there," he says to me from his position. "I think I saw something." "Fuck off," I grunt, though I do glance over in the direction he suggests. "Christ," he mutters. "Grow up already, Sawyer." "You fucked my girlfriend, you piece of shit. Don't tell me what to do." "I didn't even know you were together," he mutters, hoisting his rifle a little higher up. He looks down the sights. "Honest, I wouldn't have done anything with her otherwise." "Sure," I reply. "I really don't care, Copper. Just don't talk to me." "The water," Copper begins. His tone suddenly changed. "I said, don't talk to me," I reply. "Just, no, Sawyer. The water. Look." I turn to look, and I watch, confused, as, despite the complete lack of rain, a torrent of water begins bubbling, frothing, and pulling out from beneath a bush, filling in the grooves and trenches in the ground as it spills towards the outpost. The sounds of an animalistic grunting and hooting suddenly burst from the leaves ahead, and I shoulder my rifle, blood cold.
"We have activity,"
I bark into my radio, giving my location as the men on either side of me steel themselves in turn. A small deer bursts from the bushes and charges into the light right towards us, and almost gives me a heart attack as it does so. We all hold our fire, however, watching as a second, then a third deer follow the first, scampering across the muddy ground and sending up splashes in the puddles, before disappearing through the ferns far off to our right. That same low crocodilian hissing rumbles out from the darkness, and a bit of sweat trickles down the side of my face. "Show yourself, bastard," I mutter quietly, and with another rustle of leaves, the creature appears, and a heavy reptile-like claw splashes down into the nearest puddle. We watch, horrified, as the buroka emerges. The thing is huge, its body an extension of the jungle and its skin like twisted bark. It hauls in its jaws the corpse of a less fortunate deer, and its stomach throbs gently, like the throat of a great frog. It hisses in warning as it begins to make its way to the ferns at the opposite side.
"Do we engage?"
Copper mutters into his radio as we watch the creature pat through the muck, unblinking.
"It's too damn close to the base,"
comes the reply.
"We can't have these things getting comfortable around here. Bring it down."
"Understood," Copper replies and raises his rifle. He fires, and the flashes of the weapon illuminate the wooden stakes in the ground and the edges of the nearby concrete blocks. The bullets strike the creature, and it roars, and with a lurch and a great gag, a torrent of water spills from its jaws, washing away the blood of the deer with streaks of deep red.
"Fuck!"
I grunt in half panic, raising my own weapon and shooting into its stomach as accurately as I can. Bullets puncture the thick, throbbing skin, and like a tank that sprung a leak, water shoots and pours from the holes. The buroka roars and stares directly at me, its eyes two bright and disconcerting pinpricks in the shadows of its sockets. There is a flicker of tension that passes between us. Then, the creature hauls the deer a little further up into its grip, and deciding that this meal is more important than the humans, it changes its course and pushes back through the foliage and the ferns towards the jungle.
"Not so fast."
I raise the rifle and release another torrent of bullets into its hide. But the creature vanishes, and with a further rustling of leaves, is lost entirely to the darkness. I catch my breath, staring at the footprints that the monster left behind. Copper leans over to me. "Damn, so these things, they're like some kind of animal then?" I turn to him.
"What?" Well, these aren't just spirits, are they? I mean, I know the lieutenant said they hunted large game, but his words didn't really register with me until just now. Do these monsters actually hate humans? Are they capable of rational thought? Or are they just animals? I don't know, Copper. I sigh wearily. Is what we're doing even right? Are we supposed to be fighting against these things? They killed Miller. I know, but lions kill people too. We don't arm up against lions though, do we? Listen, aside from the physical differences. I listen to Copper drone on for as long as I can take, before I eventually tell him to shut the hell up, and the rest of our shift continues in silence. Uneventful. When the battle groups A, B, and C return to the base, their eyes are dark and shadowed. They wear the same expression I wore myself the previous night. What happened? I ask one of them as they pass by. Everyone okay? We lost another one tonight, he mutters. Those creatures, they're smart, and they don't want us here. I exchange a quick look with Copper, who rubs his chin before heading inside. The sun's rising, and it's time for bed. The day goes by. Barnes is returned to active duty. My foolish, childish hope that Miller might make a surprise return is steadily diminishing. And sooner than I would have liked, we are back on the borders of the clearing at the edge of the outpost, awaiting the order to return into the jungle and protect the shaman. Her role, it would seem, is to blast areas around the rainforest and decrease the likelihood of a spiritual presence. But isn't what she's doing a form of spirituality anyway? I can't help but think, as we watch her begin to make her way down a winding jungle path ahead. Are we just fighting fire with fire here? And I can't get Copper's comments out of my head about whether we're fighting intelligent invaders or just dumb animals that don't know any better. Would Miller have even wanted to slay these creatures, or just study and observe them? I sigh and shake my head. Looking back, it's clear that that boy had never been cut out for this particular task force. His strengths had lain elsewhere. Battle Group C, move out, comes the order from behind, and Barnes and I leave our positions. We spread out and push our way into the jungle, flanking the shaman as a unit from all sides. It's cooler tonight, and with no rain and little cloud overhead, the moon casts a whitish, silvery glow that filters through the canopy, glistening in the droplets that cover the enormous leaves and plants all around. That being said, I am far more on edge tonight than I was in either of the previous nights. Now that I know what we're facing, every lock, every branch, every rustle in the bushes becomes a threat. The buroka blends so seamlessly into its environment that the entire environment becomes a threat. The only giveaways are that enormous frog-skin-like belly and the golden pinpricks for eyes. Fireflies flickering in the gloom catch my attention constantly. My knuckles are white as I grip the rifle. We've been equipped with heat vision apparatus, and I reach up to my forehead to bring the goggles down over my eyes. The silhouettes of my teammates are illuminated in ghostly white. The goggles make it difficult to traverse the rough and uneven terrain, however, and they make it hard to identify bodies of water, the biggest clue that the creatures might actually be lurking nearby. We're not even sure at this stage if the creatures give off heat in the traditional sense. I sigh and flip the goggles back up onto my forehead. A voice crackles through my radio.
The shaman has found her location. Stand ground and hold positions.
We do so. Barnes is off to my left, Alejandro to my right. I shift from foot to foot, preparing for a long, stressful hour or so. Hey, Alejandro, I quietly call out to the man beside me, and he turns to me. Are burokas something you've heard of before? Alejandro grins and opens his mouth to speak.
as the moonlight catches and flashes in water pooling around his feet. I glance down and watch as the puddle grows rapidly larger. I follow the flow with my eyes and realize the water source comes from a bush right in front of us. Everything seems to slow down as my adrenaline spikes. I try to shout the man's name, but it's as if my voice is not fast enough for my mind to command. The bush before us bursts into leaves, and from behind it springs a beast with two golden eyes fixed resolutely on my comrade. Its jaws open wide, and water gushes from behind a row of cracked brown teeth, and the jungle alights with gunfire and flashing weaponry. Alejandro cries out in alarm as he is knocked back, and everything speeds back up as the buroka attempts to entrap him in its monstrous jaw.
Not again. Please.
My gun rattles as I unload bullet after bullet into the thing's stomach. Water springs and gushes from behind that membrane-like skin, and the soldiers around us rally into formation.
Secondary weapon,
bellows the officer in charge, and a soldier with a massive over-shoulder device I'm not familiar with steps up from behind the ferns. With a flash and a bang that rings in my ears, a thick cloud of fire powder is blasted from the end of the barrel and covers the buroka's head. It pulls back, hollering with a noise I have not yet heard in this forest. A noise of anguish that sends shivers right through my core, and it thrashes, releasing Alejandro as steam pours from its jaws. I do not see what happens next. In the chaos, and from the myriad shadows, another of these beasts appears, and another, and another. Water flows like a sudden river across the ground, and branches and twigs and leaves are all caught up in the rush.
Fall back!
Comes a roar.
Protect the shaman!
But, disoriented, I cannot see where I am going. I bring my gun up with a cry of alarm and fire into the black gaping jaw of the buroka before me. I scramble backwards and away as it snaps down on a fallen log, crunching it with a shower of splinters, water pouring from behind the teeth.
Sawyer!
Barnes shouts out from somewhere nearby.
Where are you? Here!
I call back in the clamor, racing away from the approaching monsters. I see my comrade, and as I run to him, I feel myself slipping. The ground gives way, and I tumble and crash down the side of a long slope, grasping and tearing out vines on the way down as they fail to slow my fall. I shout out in alarm as I collapse in a tangle of roots, and I hear the sounds of Barnes landing nearby with a grunt and a crash. I look up and back the way we fell, but it's so difficult to tell exactly where we came from. We're at the base of a steep slope, and this bank seems to extend a long way in both directions. Something slithers out of the foliage at the bank summit, and I catch sight of those two golden pinpricks. I scramble over to Barnes and grab him by the scruff of his neck.
Up! Get up, goddammit! They're coming!
Armed only with our rifles, we do not have access to the secondary weaponry, and so we retreat deeper into the jungle, my back to his as we fire up the approaching buroka. It bellows and rumbles, and water pours from its mouth, but our line of sight here is good, and so our sustained concentrated gunfire into its belly eventually causes the beast to slip and stagger, leaking as it tumbles violently down into the mud with a crashing of trees and a burst of murky water. Another of the monsters approach through the shadows, and in the confusion, our disorientation becomes worse. I am aware of shouting and clamoring in the distance, but right now, I'm just trying to survive. The largest of the burokas, the one already riddled with bullet holes, crashes through the small trees to one side of us, its mouth open wide, water gushing and pouring out towards us. As Barnes fires into its belly, I jam my rifle up into its jaws. It bears down on us, and I fire again and again through the roof of its mouth as I grimace and grunt under the strain. At last, the beast collapses with a groan, smashing down hard into the jungle weeds and plants as water continues to leak from behind its teeth and from the dozens of holes in its stomach. Barnes and I both stop for a second to catch our breath, inhaling great lungfuls of jungle air, or muscles burning. If it wasn't so morbid, and if I wasn't so terrified and exhausted, I might be a little fascinated by how quickly the corpse of this creature returns to the land. It scarcely withers, but once still and unmoving, it looks just like another piece of the jungle, indistinguishable from the surrounding flora. The other buroka growls from a distance, but as we raise our weapons towards it, it has the sense to slink off and away into the darkness, vanishing from sight. We hear the rustling of bushes grow quieter and quieter, until at last, it fades from earshot. I lower my weapon in shaking hands and turn to my comrade. The two of us are drenched in muck and sweat.
Jesus, he mutters. So, where are we?
We take stock and consider our surroundings. We appear to be in some kind of deep valley. It winds its way through the forest, and our surroundings are broken in random, tumbled logs, curious plant life, strange trees with long roots. Come on, I say to him. Let's follow the valley down a little, see if there's a natural way back up. Right, Barnes nods, and we set off, very much on our guard as we make our way between the high slopes on either side, following the winding trail. Twigs and other such debris crack and crunch beneath our feet. Despite the lack of recent rain, the ground down here is still soggy and wet, and the mud sticks to our boots with every step. As this has shown to be a precursor to an attack, Barnes and I remain cautious, keeping our eyes sharp and focused on the shadows all around us. I bring my radio up to my mouth and request the location of our superiors. It crackles in response, but I hear the voice of my CEO come through. He gives me some coordinates, though they're difficult to make out. Did you get those, Barnes? I ask him as we push through the leaves of low-hanging trees. I think so, he says, but my GPS is glitching. It won't let me input the whole thing. I try mine. Similar story. Alright, I say. Let's just keep moving forward. There will be a way up on here, I'm sure of it. As we trudge on through the valley, and a thought suddenly strikes me. Barnes, I say to him, you studied the maps of the area, right? Between the missions? Yeah, he nods. I had a lot of time to do that while I was recovering from the injury. He points to his head. Do you remember seeing a valley like this marked on the map? He considers this and looks around at the silver-tipped plants and trees. You know, I don't think I did. Can't remember seeing one at least. I take another step, my foot crunching into the ground, and I pause. I hear the sounds of a commotion up ahead, of shouting voices, muffled by the thickets of tangled weeds. The hairs across my forearms all begin to raise, and I look down at the ground, crouching to push aside the muck and jungle scum that has accumulated here. What I find are the remains of fish, half decayed, rotten. The crunching was not twigs nor leaves. It was bones. The valley floor is littered with them. Except, it's not a valley, Barnes, I mutter through clenched teeth, looking up to the banks on either side. It's a river basin. Fuck. And with this realization, the burokas upon the banks become clear. What we mistook for a part of the natural line of hill and foliage are a whole host of the creatures, longer and larger than the ones that attacked us in the forest. Barnes and I raise our guns in panic, but there's nothing we can do. I lower the rifle in frustration and bring the radio up to my mouth.
We have contact! Requesting urgent support! Urgent support! Coordinates are...
And then I begin trying to reel off the numbers half visible on my glitching GPS. I make it about halfway through before the burokas gurgle and roar in unison, their bellies shining in the moonlight. And, with sickening belches, great rivers of murky water begin to pour from behind their jaws. More than should be physically possible. They retch in froth, and the water cascades in great waterfalls all around. The long grasses and ferns are forced back as the river starts crashing towards us, flowing back into the basin from where it was so unnaturally swallowed.
Move!
Barnes yells, and together we hurtle our way through the branches at double speed, skidding and splashing in the rising tides as branches and logs are disturbed and shifted with the flow. They'll quickly become more dangerous as the basin fills and the speed of the water increases.
Fuck's sake!
I bellow as I leap over a great stone, landing with a splash as the water continues to rise. The sounds of the commotion we heard earlier become clearer. It's a voice, a human voice, and gunfire. There are flashes in the forest just off to our left, but the tide is rising. A buroka on the summit of the bank to my left raises up onto its hind legs, and with a monstrous roar, its stomach lurches, and a fresh torrent of water is jettisoned out and down towards us, an instant heavy waterfall as it rushes and crashes against the banks. I raise my rifle to shoot, and I puncture the creature's stomach. It twitches and hisses with anger, but simply adjusts its position and continues to expel the watery contents.
Sawyer!
I turn to look. Barnes gestures me over.
Sawyer, I think there's a way up over there. We can use those vines for leverage, and there's an outcrop. You see? If we stand back to back, it's an easily defensible position. We'll have better line of sight. I got it.
I shout back over the rising rumble of the river.
But just hang on. There's someone else down here.
I shove through the leaves of an old bent tree as a rotten log goes drifting past. As the water rises, as the river falls like rain, desperate to return from where it was stolen. I stumble to a stop as the water threatens to reach my waist and froths against my legs. I reach up and rub a hand across my forehead, pushing back my hair, and I finally catch sight of the source of the commotion. Of course it would be you, I mutter, seething with frustration and exasperation at the sight before me. It's Copper, naturally, thrashing around in a rising pool, his arms tangled in reeds and vines. His rifle has ceased to work and splutters and clacks harmlessly as he forces himself to keep his head above the rising tides.
Sawyer?
Barnes calls from behind me.
Sawyer, are we going for it or not? What's the decision?
I close my eyes for a moment and screw them tight shut. With a deep angry sigh, I shout out loud and throw myself across the debris towards Copper's position.
Copper!
I bellow at him, and he looks at me as the water is sent splashing up all around him.
Calm the fuck down. Grab onto this.
I take up a long branch and rest it against the nook in a tree to my right, extending the end down towards the man's position. He grasps it with flailing arms, and I reach over, careful to avoid his panicked, grabbing hands to tear away the vines caught about his neck. He splutters and gasps as he drags himself up the branch, and when I am able to, I reach out for his collar and haul him out of the pool by the scruff of his uniform. As I do so, I glance up, and there, right above us, perched on a moss-covered rock, is a buroka, closer than any I've seen before. Its eyes, like golden pinpricks of light, bore down into mine, and my blood freezes. We hold each other's gaze, but to my surprise, the creature does not pounce. It does not open its mouth. It simply stares at me, and I at it, as Copper retches beside me, coughing up the river water. He hasn't even noticed it yet. Starlight from above catches on what at first appears to be two enormous branches jutting out from the creature's head. But they are not branches. They're antlers. Is this the same creature that killed Miller? I don't have time to dwell on it. I feel a hand grab my shoulder. It's Barnes.
Sawyer, we gotta move. In a few minutes more, this whole place is gonna be underwater. Go!
Right. I nod and tear my eyes from the buroka. There's no time to do anything now but to get the hell out. With Barnes' help, We grab Copper beneath the arms and half run, half swim towards the ledge that Barnes identified earlier.
"Move, soldier!"
I shouted him, and to his credit, Copper seems to find his feet a little, stumbling along with the rest of us through the mud and the rising torrent until we hit the bank on the far side.
"Help me up,"
Barnes says, and Copper and I help shove him up the ledge, where he in turn helps hoist the two of us up with him, using the adjoining vines for support. Once stable, and with rifles raised, Barnes and I go back to back, and, with bright flashes of yellow, began firing into the creatures on either side. Bellies burst, and water splashes in all directions. Their groans and howls make a terrible cacophony in the jungle night. And gradually, they fall back. I shoot one last look down to the river basin before it fills back up to its peak, and I catch one final glance of the antlered buroka staring up at me. A gust of wind ripples through the valley, and my soaked-through hair is blown about my face. The creature begins to turn as I am forced to blink the water from my eyes, and when I can see again, the thing has vanished.
"Hey!"
Copper shouts.
"Hey, look! Up there!"
I do so, and the sounds of a myriad of helicopter blades begins to grow louder over the sounds of Barnes's gunfire. I realize that the rising wind was not natural and is instead the force of air blown by the choppers as they circle overhead. "About damn time," I mutter as gunfire from the aircraft rattles down into the valley, streaking through the jungle with considerable force.
"Hold your positions,"
sounds an order through Barnes's crackling radio.
"We're coming down for you. Let's get you out of there. Stand by."
The three of us follow our command until one of the helicopters drops down a long ladder, flittering in a nearby clearing.
"Come on!"
Barnes shouts.
"Let's go!"
And so we do, ascending into the helicopter, strapping ourselves in as it turns with the rest, and holding tight as it begins to make its way back to base. The helicopter hammers through the air as the renewed river rages fast and wide, far below. My dreams that night are of the buroka perched onto the rock, the one with antlers. It occupies my thoughts as we debrief the next morning, as we begin planning our new strategies. It was well aware of both Copper and myself long before we'd even seen it. The buroka, I mean. It could have pounced and dragged us down into the water whenever it liked. But it didn't. Why not? Why didn't it pounce? I sit alone for a while on a bench at the edge of the base, watching a flock of colorful parrots as they fly around the treetops. Alejandro stops by and shares a drink with me. His arm is in a sling, but he's okay. Copper stops by too, to say thanks for our rescue. He's awkward about it, but I tell him it's no problem. He reaches out a hand, and I shake it before he goes along his way. To my greater surprise, however, I am also joined by the shaman herself. I've never actually seen her out during the day before, but she comes and sits beside me for a while. I say hello to her, and she smiles at me, but we say nothing further for a long while. We just look out into the rainforest and appreciate its beauty. The buroka are going to keep coming, aren't they? I ask her eventually, and she nods. Why? I ask again, turning to her. Is this part of something greater than we can appreciate? Is it really worldwide? This spiritual awakening? Is the world waking up to something we're not ready for? To this, she has no answer. She simply turns back to the jungle and gently kicks her feet. I sigh. I am a soldier. I know my duty. I will focus on the objectives at hand, and I will defend the camp. I will defend the shaman And even if the rumbling, roaring tide is set to grow larger and faster and stronger, even if we're doomed to be washed away like fallen logs in an angry river, I will fight regardless. Always. Because this is what it means to be human.